Hello, everybody. Welcome to our latest people and business discussion, where I'm going to be talking to Vicky Henderson about all things emotional intelligence. So I'll start by letting Vicky introduce herself, I think.
Thank you very much, Kay. So yes, as Kay said, I'm Vicky Henderson. My business is Ascend Performance Coaching, and I am the Chief Mindset Revolutionary at Ascend Performance Coaching, and I also specialise in emotional intelligence. I work 50% of my business with teenagers and schools, helping them develop resilience, confidence, self-esteem, etc. And the other 50% of my work is with small businesses, helping them improve their emotional intelligence and leadership skills.
Thanks, Vicky. I'll just introduce myself briefly. So I'm Kay Hamblin from 8 Legal. We provide very kind of practical, people-focused HR and employment law support to businesses. And I'm also a workplace mediator, so dealing with some of those little tricky situations that tend to pop up in most businesses from time to time. Um, so we'll get started. As I say, if anybody's got any questions, just chip in and we'll bring you into the conversation. So Vicky, I think we've probably all got an idea in our heads of what emotional intelligence is, but whether that's quite accurate for a lot of us. So could you start by just kind of outlining what you mean, what we mean when we talk about emotional intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. I had this conversation recently with my sister who was trying to tell me that my 10-year-old nephew was really quite emotionally intelligent. And I went through and I went, what about this? What about this? And she's like, oh, okay, maybe not. Okay. So we all have a level of emotional intelligence, every single person. And they will be developed to various different levels, depending on who we are, what's going on in our life, etc., etc. And emotional intelligence underpins everything that we do in life, basically. And it falls into four different categories. Sometimes you get a fifth one because they separate motivation out. So the first element is about self-awareness, and it's about being really aware of yourself, of how you're feeling, how you're behaving, how you're speaking, and the impact that that has both on you and on other people around you. Because a lot of us go through life on sort of autopilot. But actually, when you start to become aware and choose to become aware, then you will find that you have different solutions and different possibilities to help you problem solve and move through life. So that's the first element of it. The second element, which is where most of us struggle, frankly, I've done a lot of emotional intelligence assessments over the years, and this is the weak one. And you'll probably recognize this when I talk about it. And that's called emotional management or emotional regulation. And that's self-management and self-regulation. And this is your ability to manage negative emotions and impulses in a constructive way. It's your ability to not go keyboard warrior. It's your ability to not fly off the handle. It's your ability to sort of process stuff in a much more measured way. And again, it's about choosing how you're going to respond to things. The second part of the equation is about social. It's about other people. So you've got the social recognition or the social awareness, which is, can you recognize other people's emotions? Can you interpret their behavior? And can you basically start to kind of build relationships, build rapport with people in a way that's going to get the best out of them? And then the fourth area is your what we call your social regulation or your social management. And that's how you show up. How do you behave with your friends? How do you behave with your family, with your partner, with your children, with your business colleagues, with your boss, with your employees, depending on where you sit? And they all feed into each other. We all have areas of our emotional intelligence that are probably more developed just because that's the way we are and we maybe need those areas. And we all have areas that could be developed. And essentially, the more you work on your emotional intelligence, the more you can increase it. But it has to be a conscious effort because emotional intelligence essentially is about choosing how we think, feel, and act. And if you have a knee-jerk reaction, you're not making a choice, a conscious choice about how you think, feel, and act. So in a nutshell, that's your emotional intelligence.
That's really interesting. So it's that kind of that choice element, I think, is what's the key point there, isn't it? Rather than just an automatic knee-jerk response. It's taking that moment to think, oh, hang on a minute, what's really going on here? How am I really feeling? And what can I do about it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And, lots of people have these, psychometric assessments and all of these things done at work, and they'll say, oh, I'm a this. But actually, if you're a that and you're stressed and you have low emotional intelligence, you're going to get these behaviors. If you're that and you're stressed and you have high emotional intelligence, you're going to get completely different behaviors. So although people might like to label themselves and say, this is me, actually, there's a whole nother layer to that around when I'm under pressure, what's actually going to happen here? Am I
Yeah.
going to become a fabulous leader or a dictator, basically?
So it's clearly this emotional intelligence has an impact on so many different things. So from a business perspective, where do you think it's particularly important? Where does it have the most impact?
I wouldn't say it has one area where it's specifically the most, but if your people and your emotional intelligence is more developed, it helps with well-being. Because so it will reduce stress and anxiety, it will give you more resilience. So on a very basic level, your mental health, your well-being, etc., is impacted. But also, the more highly developed your emotional intelligence is, it will increase your ability to communicate effectively. It will increase your ability to be productive. It will increase your ability to plan in advance. Um, to develop yourself and different people. It will increase your ability to manage change. So it basically it has an impact in all sorts of different areas of the business. And little tweaks here and there can have a huge impact on a longer term basis.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I think that, I mean, there's so much about well-being and mental health in the workplace at the moment, and stress and how we manage that. Um, that anything you can do to help is going to sort of massively impact productivity, I think, as well as people's well-being. It's going to be good for the business as well as the people in the business, I guess.
Yeah, I'd say it has like a ripple effect. If you imagine that increasing emotional intelligence is like the pebble you drop into a pond, you then get a ripple effect from that just goes out into all sorts of different areas. And I mean, essentially, research has been done in America about money, the financial end of it, and it's been shown for each 1 percentage point that you increase your emotional intelligence, your earning potential goes up by about £1,000 a year. And, emotionally intelligent organizations that have an emotionally intelligent culture and that whole result tend to make more money as well.
Okay. Okay. So what about what sort of things can have a sort of negative effect on people's emotional intelligence? What holds people back from developing their emotional intelligence?
It's two sides to this. So people who are very fixed mindset, as in this is just the way I am, I can't change, I'm not interested. They see self-development as a weakness, and goodness me, I couldn't possibly admit that I had a weakness or that I wasn't perfect in every sense. That holds people back. Um, Seeing it as somebody else's problem, I'm fine, it's their problem. So you kind of deflect it away. That's going to stop it being developed. But also there's more fundamental things. And this is where it comes into business and the workforce, is that your emotional intelligence might be impacted by something external as well. So if you have to undergo huge change, like a pandemic, everybody's emotional intelligence took a hit, mine included. Um, if you have to, if you have a bereavement, that's going to impact your emotional intelligence. A loss of a relationship, so a divorce, a turbulent relationship with a child, if you're under huge stress because you're caring for a loved one, there's all sorts of different things that's going to be going on that can impact it. And then within work, if you have a difficult relationship with your boss or a difficult relationship with an employee or a colleague, that's going to have an impact on it as well. And the thing is that we can increase our emotional intelligence so that when that impact happens, it's not as severe, essentially. So the higher the level of your emotional intelligence, if something happens, you might have a little dip and then you can come back again because you've got the tools to dig yourself out of your dip. Whereas if you're going along down here and you don't have the tools available, that dip's going to be deeper and it's going to go on for longer. So it's then impacting your employee or yourself in your business for a much longer period of time.
Yeah, it's almost kind of if you're into that survival mode, if you're in a stressed situation, that fight or flight mode, you're not thinking and not being able to use those higher kind of thought processes and emotional regulation in quite the same way, are you?
No, and that, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy and everything, survival mode is when we're thinking about our basic needs. Can we eat? Can we heat our homes? Can we do this? Does that sound familiar at the moment? Are our jobs safe? Are we able to pay our bills? So a lot of people at the moment have sunk down into survival mode, which means that they're not actually doing the bit that they need to thrive, which is the self-development, they lose the ability to kind of see solutions and get so focused in on the problem that it's like sort of tunnel vision almost.
Mm. And I suppose, I mean, what sort of impacts do you see in people when their emotional intelligence is kind of squished down like that, when they are in this survival mode? And I mean, you said mentioned the pandemic, and I guess an awful lot of people were already knocked back by that and were just maybe creeping back out, and then we have the whole cost of living thing on top of it. Um, how does that kind of impact on people, do you think?
Manifests in people in quite different ways. If you look at the Kubler-Ross change curve, which also is applied to bereavement and could be applied to the pandemic and everything, depends where people get to on the curve. So some people, they're in denial and they'll go into denial and they'll stay in denial that there's not a problem. Everything's absolutely going to be fine. It's all fine. It's all fine. It's all fine. And that's their response. Some people just freeze and they go, I don't know what to do. This is really scary. I don't know what to do. And then they can't make any decisions at all. So it impacts your decision making. Some people are going to get really angry about it. And then others will kind of get depressed and think, oh, the longer it goes on, this is really bad. And, you can't then see a future ahead of you. Whereas others will work through that. They might go through the same sort of cycle, but up here, and they'll work through it quite quickly because they'll be like, okay, no, I do need to accept this. Yes, this is frustrating, but actually getting angry isn't really going to help me. If I stand still, that's not helping me either. So it's all about how can I help myself? How can I move forward in this? And I certainly know a lot of business owners at the moment who have said to me, do you know what? COVID was quite good by comparison because at least people still had money and they're being impacted by the fact that now people have stopped money. So I've got the same number of clients. For example, a photographer friend said to me, but I've got half the amount of income because they're not spending as much. The average spend has dropped. And then you go into survival mode and you're thinking, right, I've just got to do this. I've got to do that. And that's when things can get out of control if you don't say, actually, no, I need to stop. I need to dig myself out of this hole here. And the more developed your emotional intelligence is, the more able you will be to dig yourself out of the hole. You won't be exempt from it. I'm not exempt from it. I have ups and downs, but you will be able to cope with it a lot better. And a lot of the stuff that we see, stress, anxiety, all of this stuff, it's on a sliding scale. You need stress and anxiety in your life in order to keep yourself safe, stop doing really risky stuff and keep yourself motivated because there's stress, which is good. When you get to a tipping point where you have no resources anymore, basically, you have resources to here, you get to here and you're like, toolbox is empty, don't have the right tool here. That's when it becomes a problem. And that's when, having more emotional intelligence, your tipping point will go this way because you'll just have more tools in the box to dig you out of whatever problem you've got.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. So, how do we get more of it? How do we develop this amazing resource in us?
It's it's about choosing to be open-minded and say, okay, I'm not perfect and I need to do some self-development here. And this is not a weakness. This is a strength because I'm investing in myself. And for business owners, start with yourself. You can't do this and you can't get your people to do it if you're not doing it as well. So it's about looking around and saying, okay, so do I need to go and read some self-development books? Do I need to go and find an online course that might help me in this and to understand more? Do I need to go and learn more about what my communication style is? Do I need to go and discuss how to manage anger better or frustration. And there's lots of different ways of doing it out there. There's coaching, there's counseling, there's all sorts of different ways that will suit different people. But it's about actually engaging in it and saying, how can I be a better person tomorrow than I was today? And how can I improve the way that I manage stress and conflict and the negative stuff in life so that actually it doesn't have such an impact on me? And it comes back to that choosing. It's about being able to take a step back. There's loads of stuff out there about increasing your self-awareness at the moment, just being more mindful about how you're doing things. And you can measure emotional intelligence. So like you would take an IQ assessment, you can take an emotional intelligence assessment. Now, they go two ways. You can find cheap, free online ones to have a play with, and then some of them are pretty good. Some of them are a bit dodgy, but you can kind of measure it. And then once you've got that and you look at the results, because you can't trick them that much unless you're really unself-aware. If you're not very self-aware, you'll think you're fantastic and you'll get a really high score. And I'll look at it and go, I don't think that's right. I think we need to work on self-awareness. So when you get high score, it goes two ways, basically, and you have to know who the person is in order to do that. But yeah, go and have a look at it, find ways, go and read about it, and then see, what's of interest to you in order to start working in this area. There's loads of stuff out there about increasing your emotional intelligence and loads of different ways in which you can do it, basically.
Yeah, it would be really helpful, maybe for when we send the follow-up out, and the links to the recordings, if you've got a couple that you'd recommend that people have a look at, then maybe you
Yeah,
could.
no, absolutely. I mean, I offer emotional intelligence assessments and feedback sessions as well, where
Mm.
you do the profile, you have a 1 hour feedback, and then you run off with it, and it gives you 80 different strategies you can start using straight away to increase the areas that need attention, because it won't be every area, because some of your areas you'll be more developed in than others just because you've chosen to.
Yeah, that's an I was just actually thinking as you were talking, do you find people tend to be fairly even around them, or are people very
No,
skewed? Very
all
skewed,
over the shop.
right?
All over the shop. Lots of people I find actually are quite good at the social stuff. They come out higher on the social stuff, but the personal stuff is not so good.
Okay.
And then even within that, somebody will be really good at emotional identification and being able to say, this is how I'm feeling and describe what's going on, but absolutely challenged with actually being able to manage that and bring it under any form of sort of control. So yeah, we all have different areas of strength in the area within emotional intelligence. And it's just finding out, okay, which ones are holding me back so that I can start to work on those.
Right. It's interesting. Yeah. So to focus your efforts in the right sort of
In the
area.
right area, yeah.
Okay. I mean, thinking back to businesses, if we were able to increase the emotional intelligence of the people in our businesses sort of across the board, how would businesses benefit from that? What would they see as a return if they invested in that sort of development for their people?
There's been quite a lot of research done in this area, and I've actually got some statistics to hand here, and it's quite interesting as to what actually has been shown to be helpful. So, for example, people have found that the relationship you have between the employer and the employee improves. It has a huge positive impact on performance, productivity. It has a positive impact on the culture because everybody's in a similar self-development, always better than yesterday, growth mindset culture. People get better at problem solving. They become more creative with what they're doing. So they might be more innovative, come up with new ideas, more collaboration, a better work climate, and you get more committed and more loyal people because actually everybody's feeling really valued, everybody's working in the same direction, and you kind of remove the blame culture. You make it a place of safety where people can raise questions and concerns and they're not going to be judged for it. And everybody is able to take on board feedback and see it as a gift rather than see it as a sort of a bashing and a really negative thing. And then on the flip side of that, one company saw a 70% reduction in absenteeism over 3 years, a 94% decrease in the number of staff that they were turning over. It has a positive impact on the level of burnout. Stress is improved. You get far less hostility. And, when you're in a high risk environment, it can actually reduce the number of accidents. And therefore you're not having to pay out for accidents, and workers generally make less complaints. So from a business model point of view, actually investing in the emotional intelligence of your people will have quite a serious impact, not only on your bottom line, but just on the whole atmosphere that you get within an organization.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things you've talked about there. Obviously, we tend to get involved at the other end of stuff when things have gone wrong. And so much of what you're saying, if the communication's there, if the good culture's there, if people are respectful and understanding of each other's points of view, you avoid so many of those conflicts that otherwise escalate and take up huge amounts of time and emotional energy of the people managing the business and the people in it. It's, it sounds like it's that positive feedback loop, isn't it? Of if you get these fundamental things right, everything else kind of spirals on and improves as a knock-on effect from that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, particularly in British organisations, and I saw it a little bit in French organisations when I worked over there, but less so, is that we have this culture around feedback is seen as negative. Annual appraisals are something to be dreaded. The word performance management is like, oh my goodness, what have I done wrong? Am I going to lose my job? Whereas actually, if we change the narrative and communicating, having a little one-to-one, I used to call it a coffee chat when I worked in the hospitality industry, having a coffee chat with each of my staff, on every couple of weeks, putting a performance management program in place from the day everyone starts work. And performance management is about you being coached at work to be the very best that you can be, so that actually problems are identified before they're a problem. And a lot of them get eliminated completely because it's all seen as really positive. And you create that safe environment where people can say, actually, yeah, you've done really well here. This bit, we need to do a bit of work on that, but overall, this is where you are. And people are more likely to go, actually, yeah, let's take that. This is not a negative thing. It's not criticism. It's an area for improvement. And just change the language, change the way things are done. And then you will see this massive change in the mindset of your people as well. It's got to be done from the top down, though. I have been called into into companies to coach middle management, and I've sat through entire coaching courses where I know the problem are the people above this individual and the way they're dealing with it, but I can't do anything about it. And that's quite challenging.
Very frustrating.
Oh, yes.
I think some of it is, I think, as you say, it's changing the language. So the word performance management, performance appraisal does seem to strike dread into most people in the workplace. So maybe we need to work on this, Vicky. We need to come up with a new language for the workplace to make this stuff sound a bit more positive.
Performance enhancement's a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just changing that word rather than you're not managing it, but actually we want to enhance your performance.
Yes.
From wherever your starting point is.
That sort of performance management does come with negative connotations, I think. It just kind of...
And I think because traditionally in HR, that's how it's been used. You only go into performance management when things are really up against it and your job's on the line.
Yeah, it's usually about managing somebody out of the business, actually.
Exactly.
Performance management setups. So it's not surprising, I guess. So I think we've talked a bit about, where you'd started, if you wanted to improve the emotional intelligence across the organisation. And I guess, would you say that really it starts with finding out where people are at, or can you do it more generally than that? Or
no, I think it does. It starts with finding out where people are at. And what's interesting is there's an amazing lady called Vanessa Druskat who's done a lot of work around this. She's done a lot of work at looking at emotionally intelligent leadership, norms within teams, and how that actually a team can have either, very closed-minded or not very productive norms, or you can move them to having much more emotionally intelligent norms within the team where they're kind of reflective and supportive and everything else. And she says the most important starting point is to look at something called what's the emotional reality of your people. So first of all, sit down. What's your emotional reality? How do you feel? And this is about feelings. How do you feel about your business? How do you feel about, your employees? How do you feel about the culture? And then move that into the employee sector and say to them, so, how do you feel about your job? How do you feel about your line manager? How do you feel about the organization overall? Is there anything going on in your life outside work that is causing you an impact? Because in Britain particularly, we're really good at saying, leave your positive stuff in the car park, don't bring it over the threshold of my business. Well, we're all emotional human beings, and that's just not going to happen. They might not talk about it at work, but it will be in their head. They'll be stressed out, and because they're stressed out, they're not focusing on what you need them to do. So it's about leadership saying, right, some of what I'm going to hear might be a little bit challenging towards a line manager, might be a little bit challenging towards me as the business owner, if that's the case, or the CEO. But if we don't know this, we're never going to move away from it. And what happens in a toxic culture is it just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's far more damaging to have a couple of toxic people out there, or a team that's particularly toxic out there, than actually nipping it in the bud and saying, right, what's got to be sorted out here, which is why I say it needs to be a trickle down effect. Get the top end really on the emotional intelligence, engaged with coaching, engaged with personal development themselves and performance improvement themselves, because they need to be able to listen to this stuff and say, thank you very much. That's really interesting. Let's see how we can work forward and improve that. Because if the top aren't engaged and go into, well, that's not the way it is, I don't want to hear that. If you go into that kind of, you're not going to build that trust up there. So it's got to trickle down. And there's loads of stuff out there at the moment for the lower levels, for example. You can't afford a coaching for them, but there's loads of online platforms now that is kind of like a coach in your pocket. And you can measure people, you can help them develop in certain areas. And, they just go on and access it when they want. But actually developing a coaching culture within an organization would have a huge impact.
Yeah, and I guess it's important as well. You talk about the people at the top. They've got to be living this stuff and doing it, haven't they? There's no point in them trying to encourage everybody else to be more self-aware, more socially aware, more regulatory, if they're flying off the handle as soon as something goes wrong and shouting at people and not being.
Yes, exactly. And I think the other thing, lots of people seem to think it's kind of like a bit like a magic wand, and that half day workshop's going to cut it. It's not.
No.
This is a long-term thing. This needs to be done on a dribble process, and it needs to be done on a day by day, and everybody needs to be on the same bus in order to make it work. And as I said, there are solutions out there that would allow larger organizations to engage everybody in some type of coaching, and that it can have a huge difference. But yeah, half-day workshops with no follow-up, not worth the paper they're written on, I'm afraid. Not in this particular area. When you do technical training, absolutely, but when you're doing this type of training, it's either got to be over a period of time with accountability on the way, or it's got to be a sort of a trickle access to something on a regular basis.
It's the same thing with with most personal development thing. I mean, one of the things I looked at on my MSc was resilience and programs to increase resilience. And some of them, straight afterwards, everybody was scoring much more highly, but it just fades away very, very quickly, unless it's reinforced and worked on. And it's a as you say, it's a long-term project, isn't it?
Yeah, I talk a lot about this, and you kind of go from what we call unconscious incompetence, which is I don't know what I don't know. And then somebody says something to you and you're like, oh, I didn't know that. So then you go into conscious incompetence. So you know what you don't know, but you're still not very good at it, or you've not even started to learn it. Then you say, go and do a day's training course, and you become consciously competent. So you're aware of stuff and you're starting to learn stuff. But if you stop there, it's just going to disappear.
Mm.
You've got to get into the magic final quadrant, which is the unconscious competence, where it just happens, where you just live and breathe this new mindset, this new way of thinking. And that's where you get those real long-term benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've nattered a lot. I'm just going to give other people an opportunity. Has anybody got any questions that they'd like to put to Vicky? Right, go on then, Pete. Hands straight up there.
Yeah, two things. One more of an observation, and the other a question. The observation first. Just listening to that whole dialogue, the similarities between that and the dialogue you might have around innovation, driving innovation in a business, are quite remarkable. And actually, if you follow that through, and you're in open-minded space, you're in how you create new bits of thinking, it's a logical conclusion. But that then takes me on working in the innovation space. Creativity and the creative arts start becoming a major impetus to actually stimulating creative thinking. And of course, we know that the creative arts and choral work in some experimental instances have been good for mental health and stimulating. So, as I said, it's more of an observation, but actually there's such a strong alignment in that space. I don't know. It just sets a hair running in my mind that thinks actually is there more to that connection than meets the eye, in the sense that innovation is actually thinking about how you do things better. And what are we talking about here? About how we do things better and keep a mental mindset. So that was the observation. The question, which was more challenging, I think, is great, and that's all good. And being in the sort of worlds we do, with the shows we do and things, we find a lot of people, everybody on this call included, is here because you want to think about this, because you want to drive a change, because you're on your agenda, and you go into the workplace and you have a lot of this stuff, and everything applies broadly. Workspace leadership falls into two categories: those who have an old school thinking, who will be exactly the personification of the problem we're dealing with here, and then those who actually want to drive change and are open-minded. Now, the latter, great, we can do some work with. The former is still at this point in time probably, I'm going to hesitate to say, the majority of the working force in the UK. That's a bit of a brand statement, but it's certainly not insignificant. And how if you're sitting in a workplace thinking, blow this for a game of monkeys, and actually it's not working, and you've got a boss and a boss's boss or ultimate boss who's saying, really guys, all soft and cuddly, I don't think so, can you just do your job please? How do we deal? How can that get dealt with? How can we start exploring that one?
It's a really difficult one, Pete. A lot of people who I coach end up making radical changes in their life because of the coaching. And you get into a situation where you've done the work on yourself, but the other people around you haven't necessarily done it. Now, coaching and a coaching culture doesn't work unless you're prepared to put the time and effort into it and that you believe it's going to work. So in many respects, the majority of the workforce in this country, or the businesses in this country, aren't going to get there. And they're probably not going to get there until there's enough other companies out there that are offering this very different style of culture and thinking, that recruitment becomes a problem for those that are stuck in their ways. And, even when I first started talking about emotional intelligence sort of 5 years ago, people were like, what's that? It was massive in the US, but it wasn't really a word that's around in this country. Now, 5 years down the road, everybody's talking about emotional intelligence in certain circles. And some people, it can be used in a negative way. There is a whole flip side to this, but actually getting through to those people, they're not helpable, unfortunately. Those that are closed-minded to it, that can't see the value in it, aren't helpable. And that's where it becomes really challenging. But, at the end of the day, you know, as an employee, if you're stuck in one of these situations, unfortunately, there's not going to be a magic wand and they're not going to suddenly come around to your way of thinking overnight. It's about potentially going out there and finding a business that is moving more in the right direction that suits your needs. And as I said, it's going to be a really slow process where eventually people will be forced into, or we get a change of the guard where modern, you know, younger people are coming through who are more open-minded and have younger, you know, more open-minded ideas, and that they can drive through the change.
So interestingly, just drawing another parallel there then, which you bring to my mind, and we do some work in social value and localizing procurement and the like, and something we've been doing a bit of that thread for quite a while. And something that was said in a meeting with a very big corporate who shall remain nameless, in fact, who are investing vast sums of money in driving social value in their business and localized procurement. And that was backed up by two other large corporates in the meeting. And I suddenly realized at that point, this wasn't just about them feeling warm and fluffy about social value. They were saying, no, this isn't complicated. The way legislation is going and the way everything's going, social value is going to be really important in every sense. And if we don't invest ahead in this, we're going to run out of supply chain suppliers, because there are things that we're going to have to be talking to them about legislatively or simple best practice. And when they say no, they're going to write themselves out of the supply chain. So we have to invest in getting people understanding this. I wonder whether actually the recruitment companies are a major part of this journey, because I think I hear what you're saying, and I think for some of those businesses who might be a bit more old school in their thinking, or even in fairness, just slower to commit time and energy and investment to look at this, if the recruitment companies are saying to them, you know, we've got people out here, there are jobs out there. If this doesn't become a significant part of your package and what you're doing, and as you are an employer, you're going to stop being able to attract the best talent. That could be probably one of the biggest vehicles to make it kick in.
I think that's absolutely right, isn't it? So you cannot force somebody to do this work on themselves. You can't really, you know, you could force them to attend a workshop, you can force them to sit down in the room and do whatever, but you can't make somebody change themselves or change themselves emotionally unless they're invested in it. So I think it does come down to, as Vicky said, you get people who have put the time in, and if the people up top are still, you know, behaving in an unacceptable way, or a way that makes your life difficult, you're going to look for somewhere else, you know. And it is about what business will have to do to retain and attract the people that they need. And that's how that's the way the pressure will be brought to bear, I suppose.
I think one of the other things I've noticed is that a lot of companies do exit interviews, but they don't necessarily choose to see that as a learning exercise, and actually to say, right, so we've lost this person. Did we want to lose them or did we not? So we didn't, we don't really mind. That's fine. Not a problem. Really not our person. But if you didn't want that person to go, then actually you need to have asked those difficult questions and listen to those difficult answers around why, what the motivation is to leave, because that's what's wrong in your organization. If you've got talent leaving, so it comes back to the recruitment, because, you know, if someone leaves, you have to recruit. If you've got people leaving, you also need to be able to take a long, hard look in the mirror. And I think a lot of the time at the moment, people say, oh, well, that was just their opinion, or, you know, they were just a troublemaker, or, you know, they weren't, you know, being sensible about it and everything. They were being irrational. They're being over emotional. And if we're not choosing to find these learning opportunities within what's happening, then, you know, if you've got really high turnover, it has a massive impact on your bottom line. Let's talk money. Lots of people see this type of investment in their people and themselves as a cost. Well, actually, it's not a cost. It has a long-term return on investment. It has a long-term benefit. If you think about what I was sharing with you, 70% reduction in absenteeism. And maybe companies, if we could encourage them to look at different types of KPIs about actually how much money is it costing you when people are off sick? How much money, and what are they off sick for? And if it's a huge amount of stress, and actually talk money, because even old school can deal in money. And if they can see that by not investing in this stuff, actually it's hurting their bottom line, it's hurting their shareholders and all of that, it's hurting their bonus, then they might start to come round to it. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long, long, long slog, I think, to get people round there.
Interesting for exit interviews as well, though. So it's who conducts the interview as well, doesn't it? Because if you consider that so many people are leaving because of their manager, if the manager conducts the exit interview, you're not going to get honest or valuable information from that, because that relationship is the problem. So you're not going to get any kind of useful.
Yeah, I worked in a company once where the exit interview was never done by the line manager. And I was very brutally honest when I was leaving that particular company. And it was the HR director, well, it was the finance director that did it. And he said, so we need you to come back after, you have volunteered very kindly to come back for a week and help us with this thing that only you know how to do. Because we need to manage, we can't do this without you. However, just so you know, I will withhold this exit interview from your line manager until we've done that, because if they see it, they will refuse to let you back on the premises, and I can't afford for you not to come back. And that was the situation in the organization. And, that's quite scary, that people are having to withhold information because somebody might make an emotional decision that would actually damage the company longer term.
Yeah. You're muted, Pete.
Sorry about that. There's a wonderful irony here, of course, in that to really get the importance and the significance of everything we're talking about in emotional intelligence and the benefit on a business, you have to have a certain amount of emotional intelligence, which actually is a wonderful irony, but possibly also part of the problem, because if you don't have the emotional intelligence to understand the argument about emotional intelligence, then it's going to be an upward battle at the best of times.
Because it becomes about protecting yourself. If you have, as Vicky's mentioned, fixed mindsets, if you have this belief that you are what you are and you're not going to change, you have to protect yourself, because any criticism is a fundamental threat to you. So rather than seeing it as feedback, you can improve, you can act on that feedback and get better. It's just fundamentally negative about you. So it's all interlinks, doesn't it? This whole thing.
It does indeed. Personal security comes in there.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Security, trust, threats, fear, hugely underlined by fear, and and that, I think, and then that goes back into how we're raising kids. Are we raising kids to be afraid of feedback and what's happening all over the place?
Very quickly becomes a societal problem. Absolutely.
Yeah, quite a deep cultural problem. Yeah.
There's a danger we could go flying off on one.
We could go flying off in a horrible direction.
Did you have something to say, Nigel? I see.
Oh, Nigel, how do emotional intelligence deficits differ between men and women? They don't. It's very individual, Nigel, and there are some hugely intelligent men out there, and there are some hugely unintelligent men out there, and the same for women. Generally speaking, women are slightly more open-minded to actually resolving these issues. But no, there's no difference in it at all. And there's no difference in it based on social class, based on income, based on anything at all. It's very much a personal thing for each individual.
That's interesting. As an animator, I'm working with people who are often very introverted, and it includes people with attention deficit and autistic spectrum. And so, yeah, could you say something about emotional intelligence in managing freelancers with those kind of experiences?
It's because they're such a varied and wide range. It's people who sit in particularly the neurodiversity section there have obviously, depending on the severity of their condition, they have very different ways of doing this, and they will struggle in areas that we might fail to comprehend. They again all have a level of emotional intelligence, and it can be worked on. I've worked with an autistic lad and a couple with ADHD, and it can definitely be improved. And it's the problem you've got there is that you can't improve it for somebody. You're just going to have to manage what's being thrown at you. So this comes back to your emotional intelligence to come up with, you know, finding out things in a way that they feel able to express themselves, and being able to manage their behaviors, in that if you get a behavior that's really not helpful for you, or that, you know, it's not about you, it's all about them. And it's about, okay, so in order to achieve this thing, this is what we need. You know, this is what I need from you. Are you able to do that? Or do you feel comfortable doing that? And it's about finding a way to have that very different conversation. And it's not easy, because we've got no concept or perception of what's going on in that person's mind, how it functions. And therefore it can be difficult to make that connection. But I think if you just go into it with a very open mind and say, okay, this person functions completely differently to me, how can we find the way to navigate this the best way possible, you know, and see how it goes from there. But it's going to be a real case by case situation, Nigel.
Interesting question there, Nigel. Very interesting question. Probably have a whole session just on that, I can imagine. Well, I think, has anybody else got any other points or questions? No? Well, it's probably time to wind things up then. I mean, that's been amazingly interesting, Vicky. Thank you so much for your time and your input there, and for everybody else who's raised points. Our next session is on Thursday, the 26th of January, and where we're going to be looking at inclusion and the barriers and benefits to businesses of being more inclusive. So I hope some of you at least can join us for that. And in the meantime, have an amazing Christmas, and hopefully see you in 2023. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kay.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
That was great.
Thanks, guys. Really brilliant.